Much more broad. All right. First I'd like to thank a lot Luis for inviting me to be here. It's a really pleasure actually, and first to interact with a community that I'm fairly new to it. Second, because I'm not a laser person. I might be a Silvi person, and but I'm as our musical show yesterday started our event. For sure, the laser has captured me and has changed part of my day-to-day activity. So this talk is part of a broad project that we conduct in the Amazon region for the year 2016 and 17, with a very specific objective, which was to produce a biomass map for the region. So this is an important background, because you're going to see from the funders to the objective of this, how this came to what I'm going to present to you. So, okay. All right, so just a brief outline. So what was the motivation for this? How we capture the funders' attention to have this investment on the region. On the broader context in terms of tropical carbon and tropical forests, how we actually bring this science into this discussion at the regional and global level. Then what sort of sensor we use, what sort of data we produce, how we process the data, results, and other products that came out of this. So that's basic. I hope to go through all this in 30 minutes. So this is a synthesis that a student of ours just published. And she did a very, let's say, very broad assessment of what sort of data we had in the region and what sort of biomass map is being produced. So this is a follow-up of a previous work where we just showed, okay, so we need at least a information in terms of map that can be of a certain homogeneity for a decision maker, for instance, for a national inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. So that was part of the motivation for this. This is we can't really see very well, but this is how different sort of data is available at the region. So we see all these red dots here. This is the first large survey of inventory in the Amazon region that was conducted by by the Army in 1970s. So it's a broad, very broadly distributed in the region, but with specific bias. So they look to the trees that were bigger than 100 centimeters of GHP and dBH. Sorry. And and then we have a lot of projects generating data on the region. We have the national inventory effort that is becoming an important source of data for the region as well. So the idea was, so this is very recent. This is has 30 years old. Some sites has been revisited by projects in this fall. So and most of these information here from different sources, different authors, was produced based on the Hadan data. Okay. And then another exercise she did, she just looked at, if she got all the database here into a single map, And we see what is the distance between different sampling plots we have in the region. Just to remind, we're talking about 3.5 million square kilometer region. So it's a very broad region. And then if we exclude the old data set, the Hadan data set, so you see that it started being more patchy in terms of distance between the plots. And then if we extract the new national inventory, we have this distribution of plots throughout the region. Certainly we might use some model techniques out of those data here to interpolate, but as much as we can have this sort of broad distributed information and field data, that's very useful. Okay, so in terms of, where this sits as well in terms of global context, how the uncertainty on defining the biomass content in a region as that can be influential in a global level, being the discussion on climate change, being discussion on changing CO2 in atmosphere, being a discussion on a variety of issues. So we're talking about the whole tropical belt, which is almost this figure here, a little bit upper from the two top. It's about 1/4 of the carbon on terrestrial land systems. And the Amazon, which has a broad range based on those maps, it can be 50 to 25% of this. High diverse ecosystems, so this is a challenge for our work with LiDAR, but it's a huge opportunity in terms of ecosystem service, in terms of relation of conservation or production and conservation these systems to decision makers. And but our systems that are highly threatened by both climate change and especially land use change. So we're talking to a region that is very dynamic, globalized in terms of changing the land cover and land use. So this comes out from Hansen Group. So we just had this, almost 17 years of rate of change. So we see very strong change in the Amazon basin here in Southeast Asia and thus far. Another point is that how we kind of get the science information in terms of carbon dynamic in the region. So we're talking about the whole ecological and ecosystem functioning of a specific region, and we're trying to translate that into a political document, which is a national communication to the Climate Convention, for instance. And why I'm saying that? This is a work by Luciana Gatti. They are still doing this, or they're flying over the Amazon region for, they're doing atmospheric profile, and they're doing a budget, like a carbon footprint budget from the east to the west in the region, based on this flow of the wind flows. And so this is a data that they published in 2014. They are still doing that, so there's new data coming out. But interesting is that for a dry and hot year, and yesterday we learned from Michael that 2010 was a dry year with a lot of fires, and then we have a net emission to the atmosphere of almost 0.5 petagram of carbon. And the next year, when we have a wet and hot year, we have almost a neutral balance of carbon in that region. And when we look to here, which we can really see a lot, which is fine because it's also in Portuguese. But anyway, so you see here what the country reports as emission out of land use change and cover is almost 50%. That was 2014. That was the third national inventory. So that's the gross emission for a specific activity in the country. So those are activities that are required to be in the communication. When we come here, which is the net emission, so what the countries are allowed to consider looking through the IPCC guidelines, for instance, is that the ecosystems, they absorb carbon, as we know, and that this can be decreased from your emissions. So then your contribution of land use and land cover change comes from 48 to 18. And what is the base for that, at least in this country and most of the country, is that, so this we have here a profile of deforestation in the Amazon region. So this past years has been a recent issue for strong debates. But as we see, the deforestation came down and it's going up again. And this is what is calculated. So it's basic, a simple accountability. You have X amount of carbon in such area, and then you deforest, the carbons go to the atmosphere. That's basically what's going on. So, and this feeds to that. So how this all comes together in terms of how we can provide a reduction in uncertainty on this sort of information. So then we suggested, and we tried to get fund to get a large survey analysis in the region, so we could go from the reality, to expression of that biomass through LiDAR. And we use some art to do how important that is in terms of different contexts of a forest. And there we go. So that's basic was this whole motivation to get to the large LiDAR survey in the Amazon. So this is what we used in terms of equipment. The provider was Fototerra, which is a company that has a booth here in the event. So that's basic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is just time for the water. This is just what we use in terms of LiDAR. So an important aspect is that we had basic 4 pulses per square meter. And we had basic a 300 useful wide to 12 kilometers length transects. So we had almost 1,000 of these transects from 300 meters to 12 kilometers, having basic. Sometimes we got a little bit more than 4 pulses per square meter, sometimes 8, but 4 pulses was basic what was required. So it's a very, very dense amount of information. So there we go. The width was 300 meters at length, so we had almost 1,000 transects were of 375 hectares each. So that's basic how we cover the whole region. Where we decide to have the transect distributed, we use some source. So we flew over pristine forest. We had some degraded forests, as Michael showed yesterday. But we use those products that are products from the INPE, which is the National Institute for Space Research. So most of this area here is being the forest, so we have lower density of flights and more density of flights where we had pristine forest. And just to compare, this is the Radam Brazil. That's the database from Radam Brazil, which we did a small comparison that I'm going to show you. We also had some hyperspectral flights, and the requirement for that was we flew over regions that we had LiDAR data, that we had field data, and that we have GPS, and we had a sort of a representative vegetation for that specific region. So that was the differential GPS. So that was when we tried the wet and dry season, and that was the distribution of those data. So Catherine used those to do an analysis of biomass production out of hyperspectra and LiDAR.